Hello my viewers and welcome back to my channel. In a world where discussions of privilege often center around race, class and nationality, it's crucial to take a look into the complexities of socioeconomic status and opportunity. Now recently, a thought-provoking video surfaced featuring a palm-color man boldly stating that Black Americans are among the most privileged individuals in the United States. Now, his argument hinges on the stark contrast between average salaries in the United States and those in other countries, highlighting how simply being born in America confers a level of wealth inaccessible to many worldwide. However, amidst his compelling analysis, questions arise about the universality of this assertion. If economic advantage is indeed a birthright in America, as he suggests, then why frame the discussion by singling out Black Americans in his first statement in the first place? So join me as we unpack this discourse, challenging assumptions and exploring the nuances of privilege in contemporary society. Check out these videos. I will be right back.
Black Americans are one of the most privileged people in the world, and we have to talk about it more. Here's the average salary in Mexico, in Ukraine, in Egypt, in Vietnam, all big countries with huge economies from different continents. And here is average welfare check in USA. You see the difference? People all over the world have to work hard for this money, while people in America are getting more for doing absolutely nothing, just because they are born in the United States. Isn't that a privilege? Being richer than others just because of your birthright? Yes, it is. Oh, and just to be clear, it concerns all Americans, not just Black Americans. All Americans are privileged as hell, and it's about time we acknowledge that Black Americans are no exception. Now, just imagine being born in Harlem, New York, one of the richest cities in the world, in one of the richest countries in the world, and complaining about not being able to get out of the ghetto, while some Middle Eastern refugee has to smuggle himself to America illegally in a cargo bay of the ship, not having home, not having money, not having citizenship, just to get the slightest chance at life that you had since birth. Oh, and he's running from his country because your country destroyed his home, by the way. And he still somehow manages to open up his own business so he can provide for his kids. And you can't get out of the ghetto, really? Man, maybe take a subway? And please, don't give me that excuse about America being racist. Here's the list of richest households in the United States by ethnicity. White people are not even in top 5. It's Indians, Filipinos, Taiwanese, Sri Lankan, Japanese, and then some. How could they all be so prosperous if the country is so racist? Look, America is literally the leastest country in the world. Can you name any other dominantly white country that had Black president for 2 terms in a row? No, you can't, because I can guarantee you the rest of the world is actually racist as hell. You're living in the paradise of political correctness. Oh, and it might seem like I'm talking to Black Americans here, but I'm not. I know that majority of Black Americans don't even care about it all. I'm talking to crazy Americans. I'm talking to Americans who actually believe that their country is some racist, villainous hellhole that oppresses people. It's not. Look, your country is alright, I promise. So yeah, you had slavery. Who didn't? Now really, tell me, who didn't? So you racists in your country, and who doesn't? No, really, name a single country without racists. I'll wait. Stop focusing on yourself so much. This is destructive narcissistic tendency that destroys your country. You have 2 kind of whack jobs in USA. First kind thinks that you can invade any other country in the world because you're force of good. And another kind thinks that you can appropriate culture and history of any other country in the world and paint it black because you're the force of evil and you have to constantly atone for your sins before Black people. Well, guess what? You don't get to do any of those things. Keep your greedy hands off Middle Eastern oil and European history. Oil is white history figures are not. You're not villains, but you're not heroes either. You're just regular people. Just regular people who are born into insane privilege the rest of the world can only dream of. And that's exactly why.
Please do tell me how privileged Black Americans are.
Here's the average salary in Mexico, in Ukraine, in Egypt, in Vietnam, all big countries with huge economies from different continents. And here is average welfare check in USA. You see the difference?
You missed already. I guess cost of living just doesn't exist. Cost of living in Mexico compared to the United States, Ukraine compared to the United States, Egypt compared to the United States, and Vietnam compared to the United States. So while we can just say, oh, these are very big economies and look at the difference in wage compared to the welfare checks, we must take into account how much money it actually costs to live in a given society in order to determine whether or not these things are disproportionate. And given that in every fucking country you just mentioned, the cost of living is so much lower than the United States, you can understand why the difference is there. Also, this video is supposed to be about how privileged Black black people are, but the first thing he talks about is welfare checks. Also claiming that a group of people are privileged because a welfare check was set at an amount that's higher than another country's wage is fucking dumb, considering the people that live in the country with the welfare checks are considered poor for that country in that economy that they need to live in. So saying, oh my god, you're considered poor here, but you wouldn't be in a different country is as dumb as saying, oh, you were just rich. Well, guess what? People have died, so you must be privileged.
People all over the world have to work hard for this money, while people in America are getting more for doing absolutely nothing, just because they are born in the United States.
Myth number 2, it would be a damn shame if the majority of people on welfare are actually working. Because, oh yeah, while we can complain about how high the welfare checks are compared to other countries, it isn't even enough to live in America off of, which forces people who are even working full-time to still work a job while being on government assistance. Again, because while we can play Oppression Olympics, context matters. It's a damn shame you don't even realize how stupid this just was. Level 1, let's talk about your logic. This essentially boils down to don't ask for anything more if you're already receiving more than somebody else. Which, for obvious reasons I would hope, makes zero fucking sense. That Middle Eastern refugee who had to smuggle himself on a ship in order to make it to America has it measurably better than a Southeast Asian kid who will live and die in the same village buried under plastic and trash from our pollution. Does that mean we should make no effort to make it so that Middle Eastern refugees shouldn't have to smuggle themselves into the country to have a good life? Does that mean that those Middle Eastern refugees should just shut up and acknowledge the fact that they're more privileged than somebody else? Fucking no! And if you say yes, then you're counteracting everything your entire video is about. Hence why Oppression Olympics is a dumb game to play. Level 2 of why this stupid. Let's run the actual numbers. Seeing as you mentioned refugees coming to America, let's compare them to black people in America. Again, context matters. After 5 years in the United States, refugees have a median household income of $22,000. After 15 years, that grows to $37,000, and after 50 years, it grows to $67,000. Black people in the United States had a median household income of $30,400 in 1970. 51 years later, that number is $48,297, which means if we run the numbers on that, in the same amount of time it has taken refugee household income to grow by $45,000, black household income has grown by $17,897. So if I wanted to stoop down to your level and assume that money, devoid of all context, immediately denotes privilege, who is more privileged in the United States? This very point is something that you go on to contradict yourself on 2 seconds later when you go on to say, Bucko, I don't even think you realize what you're saying here. This is exactly why context matters, because I'm not sure what privilege you're trying to preach to black people about, when not only do all the other Americans make more money than black Americans, average Americans make more money than black Americans. Would you really make the argument that for any other demographic in any other country, them making less than what the average person in their country makes is them having privilege? No, the hell you wouldn't, which is why you try to bring it to a worldwide context, because as soon as you start talking about American context, you get blown out of the water and start trying to disprove him by Obama, who's going to tell him that the next president started a rumor that he wasn't even born here simply because he was black. Now we can talk about how a lot of these immigrant groups you mentioned have higher rates of college degrees, which is something that is quite literally selected for prior to immigration into this country, meaning a disproportionate amount of them coming over with education already, which is why they make so much more than the native-born population. We can talk about how Asian Americans have not faced the same institutional barriers as black people. We can talk about Harlem and how you're apparently confused that many black people can't make it out the ghetto when the city was redlined to high hell. East Harlem had the 7th lowest household income among 55 other New York neighborhoods, and almost 1/3 of households live below the federal poverty line, and how it was literally the birthplace of the very Renaissance that was an artistic backlash to intense anti-black racism in the country. We can talk about the fact that while yes, slavery and racism exist in countries all over the world, the slavery that built the New World was chattel and racialized, which is something that was unique, that was not found in the Middle East, in Africa, or in Europe prior. But something tells me that if you don't even have the brain cell count to realize that you just made an entire video about why black people are privileged while using the same racist, factually incorrect statements that have been used since 20 years after slavery to justify why black people are in such shit positions, then something tells me you're not ready for that conversation. I award you no points. May God have mercy on your soul.
First of all, there's some fair criticism here, but I don't like your tone. Second of all, while I understand what you're saying about cultural appropriation in this alleged documentary by Jada Pinkett Smith about Queen Cleopatra being black, there's something I want to talk about right here. I totally agree. It's one thing to change the race of a fictional character and another thing to do it when it comes to an actual figure in history whom we have a confirmed race for. But it's so much deeper than black people just trying to maliciously rewrite history left and right, and that's what you need to understand. And fix your tone. Unlike many other cultural groups, African Americans have been stripped of their history and basically told that your history started when your people were enslaved in this foreign land. Yes, some people can trace back their roots, but it only goes so far. Just think about what the average person even knows about African history. What do you even know beyond slavery? Do you know that there were kings and queens in Africa? Did you know that one of the richest men on the planet was King Mansa Musa? And to be fair, a lot of history has been whitewashed. So when you take a step back and you understand that history for African Americans has been sanitized, it has been stripped from them, it's a little bit easier to understand why they might want to find some sort of connection to some of these big moments in history, some of these cultural figures that we've been hearing about all of our lives in Europe, in the Americas, in other parts of the world. So again, fair criticism, but if you're going to attempt to explain the why behind this, you have to do it in the appropriate manner. If not, you just open the door for all the people who have been waiting to say, reverse racism. Yeah, I knew blacks were racist too. Pitchfork, pitchfork, MAGA, American flag, KKK.
Craziest part about that is, I'm not even surprised by what he's saying. I'm not. I've come to the realization this is just the fucking world we live in. You got to deal with people like him, bro. The part that's fucking me up is he actually believes what he's saying. It's not that he said it. We done heard people that look like that say that before, right? It's the fact that he actually believes what the fuck he's saying in that video. That's the part that's me.
I'm not gonna read you the fills because the internet's already doing a hell of a job. But seriously, baby, who hurt you? Did some sister hurt you?
Dollar Tree European Chris Hemsworth. I swear to God, you give a moderately attractive person any big words and suddenly they think they know something. You talking about much shit as you have split ends, baby. That's a lot of it. How about you don't talk about things you know nothing about, sweetie? Considering you don't even live here, honey. Considering you ain't even a minority here, baby. Maybe mind your dang business, stay in your lane, maybe worry about the EU, the status of the euro. Can't quite tell where your accent's from. Sounds very Eastern European to me. Last I checked, y'all don't have a good history of race relations. So maybe focus on that ratsness of a beard you got, baby. Because judging by it, you ain't put beard oil in a very long time. And it's over there looking like a frazzled Shar-Pei on a southern summer day. Just parched. There's your honey.
Well, the first mistake here is he decides to list 4 different countries and claims that they are all large economies and that somehow they are equal to the United States for the purposes of this argument. Okay, but here's the problem. When we want to talk about the size of an economy, right, we're talking about the world's largest economies. The United States is number 1. And the ones that he listed, right, Mexico is number 15, Egypt is number 35, Vietnam is 41, and Ukraine is number 112. Now, in this argument, he lists the average salaries of those other countries, but then compares them to welfare in the United States. So right off the bat, that's a false equivalency argument. And in order to continue this kind of an argument, if you want to argue something like this, you also have to take into consideration the cost of living in those particular countries. So to compare the United States average welfare salary to the average working salary of a few countries who are still pretty underdeveloped, you're already off on the wrong foot. It's comparing apples to oranges. There is no comparison. For example, the average cost of rent in Mexico is about $400 to $500 a month, whereas the average rent in the United States is well over $1,000, $1,700 to be exact. Meanwhile, the average cost of rent in Egypt is about $125 a month. So, as you can see, there's absolutely no comparison here.
Black Americans are no exception. Now just imagine being born in Harlem, New York, one of the richest cities in...
Okay, small detail, but Harlem, New York is not a city, and it's not one of the richest cities in the world, because it's not even a city. It's a fucking neighborhood in New York City, okay? Just want to clarify.
Now, in the discourse surrounding privilege and economic disparity, I feel it's important to consider the full picture before making sweeping assertions. While it's undeniable that the United States boasts a higher average salary compared to many other nations, this metric alone fails to capture the intricacies of cost of living and purchasing power parity. Now, the cost of living varies significantly from one country to another, as well as within different regions of a country itself. For instance, while the average salary in the US may appear substantial, it must be weighed against the exorbitant cost of healthcare, education, housing, and other essentials. In contrast, countries with lower average salaries often enjoy more robust social safety nets and lower expenses for basic necessities. The notion that that being born in America automatically confers unparalleled privilege disregards the systemic barriers faced by marginalized communities, particularly Black Americans. Now, despite residing in one of the wealthiest nations globally, Black Americans continue to experience disproportionately high rates of poverty, unemployment, and unaliving. Structural racism and historic injustices have perpetuated a cycle of disadvantage, limiting access to opportunities and perpetuating intergenerational poverty. Now, to claim that Black Americans are among the most privileged individuals globally ignores the harsh realities of systemic inequality and racial discrimination. Economic prosperity is not evenly distributed across racial lines, and the experiences of Black Americans underscore the fallacy of equating nationality with privilege. Instead of oversimplifying complex issues, I feel he should have acknowledged the intersectionality of privilege and worked towards dismantling the systemic barriers that perpetuate inequality for marginalized communities. Centuries of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism have entrenched economic inequalities for Black Americans. Even after the abolition of slavery, discriminatory practices such as Jim Crow laws and redlining restricted access to wealth, building opportunities such as home ownership and entrepreneurship. Despite strides towards desegregation and equal educational opportunities, Black students still face disparities in quality of education, funding, and access to resources compared to palm-colored people. Unequal educational opportunities perpetuate a cycle of limited job prospects and lower earning potential. Now, studies have consistently shown that Black job applicants are less likely to receive callbacks for interviews and are disproportionately represented in lower-paying jobs. Discriminatory hiring practices, wage gaps, and limited opportunities for advancement contribute to economic inequality among Black Americans. Black Americans experience high rates of chronic illnesses and face barriers to accessing quality healthcare, leading to increased medical expenses and economic strain. Limited access to affordable healthcare exacerbates financial insecurity and perpetuates disparities in economic well-being. Black Americans are disproportionately targeted and unalived at higher rates than palm-colored people, leading to long-term economic consequences such as loss of employment, housing instability, and limited access to resources upon re-entry into society. The racial wealth gap remains stark, with Black households holding significantly less wealth compared to palm-colored households. Now, this disparity is attributed to factors such as intergenerational wealth transfer, home ownership rates, and investment opportunities, all of which are influenced by systemic barriers and discrimination. So in light of these realities, it's evident that Black Americans face unique challenges that undermine the notion of universal privilege based solely on nationality. Now, beyond income disparities, there exists a profound wealth gap between Black and palm-colored Americans. This gap is largely attributed to historical factors such as discriminatory housing policies like redlining, which systematically prevented Black families from accumulating wealth through home ownership and property appreciation. Now, as a result, palm-colored families have substantially higher levels of intergenerational wealth transfer, perpetuating the cycle of economic disadvantage for Black Americans. Now, Black Americans often encounter discriminatory practices within the financial sector, including predatory lending, higher interest rates on loans, and limited access to banking services in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Now, these barriers hinder wealth accumulation and economic mobility, contributing to the widening gap between Black and palm-colored Americans. The legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism has profound psychological and emotional impacts that reverberate across generations. Intergenerational trauma can manifest as reduced educational attainment, higher rates of mental health issues, and barriers to economic success, further perpetuating the cycle of poverty and inequality. Despite progress in civil rights legislation, systemic inequalities persist due to inadequate policy interventions and lack of political will to address structural racism. Policies such as the war on drugs, mandatory minimum sentencing, and cuts to social welfare programs disproportionately harm Black communities, exacerbating economic hardships and limiting opportunities for upward mobility. We have finally come to the end of the video. Share your thoughts as well in the comment section. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.